Metroid, the series that revolutionized the side-scroll shooter genre and many gameplay mechanics, which games still follow today. Let's turn back the clock to the 80s, where some of the most revolutionary 8-bit games graced the earth.
The 1980s was Nintendo's golden era, with releases ranging from Donkey Kong, Ice Climber, Super Mario Bros., and The Legend of Zelda. They set the bar in the realm of video games for decades to come. But they weren't finished here. The oldest development team in Nintendo, called Nintendo Research and Development 1, with help from Intelligent Systems, started work on a side-scrolling shooter.
But before I continue, let me give you a brief history behind Nintendo's R&D 1 team.
This division was originally led by Gunpei Yokoi, the creator of Gameboy and Game & Watch. He also acted as a mentor to the legendary Shigeru Miyamoto when he first joined Nintendo. A few notable games that R&D 1 developed were Kid Icarus, Excitebike, and Duck Hunt. Oh, the memories! In the late 80s, a small team was formed within R&D 1 called Team Shikamaru, whose job was to create scripts and scenarios for the division.
Now with that explained, let's jump back to the side-scroll shooter that R&D 1 began work on.
The project was mainly led by 3 people: Satoru Okada, Yoshio Sakamoto, and Gunpei Yokoi. With inspiration from the 1979 sci-fi horror film Alien, the development team modeled certain elements in the game around the movie.
We can see some hidden similarities, such as the names Mother Brain and Mother. Also, it can't be a coincidence that the boss Ridley has identical names with the director of Alien, Ridley Scott. Right?
Well, the team wanted to set this game apart from the other side-scrollers in the market by creating a maze-like environment where the player had to backtrack in order to progress. Similar to The Legend of Zelda, the team also wanted to add permanent upgrades to the protagonist so that the player could handle the rising difficulty. This mechanic showed that temporary buffs, like Starman in Super Mario, wasn't the only option. The game was first released in August of 1986 for the Famicom and the Famicom Disk System, called Metroid. The name comes from a combination of the words Metro and Android, since the player was underground for most of the game, and also because the protagonist had robot-like features.
Now, in order to understand the story of the Metroid series, there's some backstory that you should know.
In the year 2003 of the cosmic calendar, the Galactic Federation was created in order to regulate the various planets in the universe, and to begin a big, unified civilization. Eventually, planet Earth became part of the Federation. Things were wonderful until the arrival of the space pirates, who loved nothing more than to steal things. The Federation then formed a police group to fight them off, but even they couldn't handle it. As a result, the best of the best, also known as the Space Hunters, were recruited to handle the pirates. According to the Metroid manga, on a planet called K2L, Rodney Aran, a chief within the Federation, was gathering fuel stock, while his daughter, 3-year-old Samus Aran, was playing in the woods. Not long after, space pirates raided the area, attempting to steal the fuel. During the attack, Samus encounters Ridley, who attempts to kill her, but was saved by her mother at the cost of her life. Out of options, Samus's father takes his own life by detonating the fuel inside the ship to prevent the pirates from leaving with it. From that day forward, Ridley's ultimate nemesis was born. The Chozo later found Samus stranded and decided to take her back to their home planet, where they trained her, infused her with superior DNA, and gave her the power suit.
Alright, now that you know Samus's background,
our story in Metroid starts off in the year 20x5cc. Space pirates managed to steal a capsule containing a life form known as Metroid, which was found by the Galactic Federation on planet SR388. It's classified as dangerous given its life-leeching abilities. The pirates were working on a way to mass duplicate these Metroids for use as a bioweapon. Running out of options, the Federation recruits none other than Samus Aran, renowned for being the best space hunter, to infiltrate the pirate base located in planet Zebes. Her task was to eliminate the space pirates' leader, Mother Brain.
The feeling players got when they start playing Metroid was solitude, and perhaps desolation. In this way, the game was the first of its kind. A big part of this feeling comes from the soundtrack, which was composed by Hirokazu Tanaka. Here, I'll stop talking, just listen to this title theme.
During the first and second generation of video games, there was hardly distinction between sound effects and background music. However, this changed in the third generation as video game music gained more spotlight. As a result, sound designers competed with each other to create catchy melodies even though it may not match the atmosphere of the game. Tanaka was really unhappy with this, so when he was tasked to create the Metroid soundtrack, he wanted to do the complete opposite from the norm. Just so you can get an idea of how serious Tanaka was, here's a quote from him in an interview. He says, "I had a concept that the music for Metroid should be created not as game music, but as music the players feel as if they were encountering a living creature." Not only was he able to create a suitable soundtrack, the game designers in R&D 1 also allowed Tanaka to suggest changes to the graphical concept in order to match the music as he saw fit. This was also because Gunpei Yokoi gave the team almost 100% creative freedom. Tanaka even ended up naming all the maps in Metroid.
Wow, lucky guy. I don't think I could have asked for better coworkers. Anyways, if you were born in the 80s or early 90s, you probably would know games were a lot more difficult compared to games today. Metroid was no exception.
Not only did the atmosphere of the game give the player an isolated feeling, the high difficulty also added the feeling of desperation. As a lone bounty hunter infiltrating unknown territory, you start the game off equipped with only a basic energy gun. Some of the enemy movement in this game weren't easy to deal with provided the large knockback and damage they gave. Metroid was no walk in the park. But as you obtain more upgrades such as missiles and energy tanks, things become a bit easier to handle. These permanent upgrades also gave the player a feeling of accomplishment in the sense that they truly earned it knowing that they've survived the struggles prior to the upgrades.
An interesting fact is that the American release of Metroid didn't have a proper save system because battery save had not been fully utilized yet. Rather, the player was given a password to continue the next time they played the game.
There were a few secret passwords discovered that enhanced gameplay, which were Narpa's sword and Justin Bailey. One code gave Samus all sorts of upgrades, while the other featured Samus in a leotard.
Speaking of Samus without her power suit, Metroid is one of the first games to feature a female protagonist.
However, this would only be revealed to players through a special ending after completing the game within a certain time limit. In the instruction manual, Samus's gender is ambiguous. She is only referred to as a space hunter, and her identity was shrouded in mystery. According to Sakamoto, one of the designers had the thought of surprising the player by revealing Samus's gender at the end. The team went with the idea. This in itself sparked the transformation of females in gaming. Prior to Metroid, females within the video game realm usually filled the role of the damsel in distress.
Oh, by the way, this is where Samus's name came from.
Now let's jump ahead to the fourth generation of video games, in the era where handheld consoles started blooming, notably the Nintendo Game Boy.
Once again, Gunpei Yokoi along with the R&D 1 team were responsible for creating the Game Boy. Not long after its release, development of the next Metroid game began. However, the team was faced with a problem. They didn't know how to symbolize Samus's power suit upgrade in the new Metroid game, since the Game Boy's graphics consisted of only black and white. In contrast, Samus's Varia suit could easily be differentiated by a change in colors on the NES. Hence, the team decided to redesign the Varia suit by putting 2 round armor pieces to her shoulder. This new design stuck and was featured in the rest of the Metroid games. Given the Game Boy's tiny screen, the team had to make Samus's character model bigger relative to her surroundings in order for players to see the details. As a consequence, this made the environment feel a bit cramped. In November of 1991, Metroid 2: Return of Samus was released for the Game Boy. The story, in chronological order, carries off sometime after the Phazon crisis in Metroid Prime 3: Corruption. Realizing the dangerous mutations Metroids could go through, the Federation decided they had to send a team to SR-388 to make sure all Metroids are destroyed. The base lost contact with the team. The Federation then sent 2 more groups, but one after the other, they too lost contact. In the end, Samus Aran was tasked to eliminate the remaining Metroids on SR-388. First thing players noticed was the incredible graphics. Well, incredible for its time, of course, when handheld devices was a new thing. For the first time, Westerners could ditch passwords and have a proper save system. Samus can now duck and shoot, which allowed her to kill small enemies more easily. Also, she can now aim down while airborne. Both of these made the gameplay much more intuitive.
Personally, it always frustrated me that I couldn't kill those weak crawlers until they made their way up the wall in the NES Metroid. So I'm glad they fixed that.
There are also many new upgrades that became the staples of the franchise. As great as all the additions are, the game is very linear compared to any other Metroid game to date, and also lacks much surprises for the player. The objective is straightforward: kill all the Metroids. It would have been better if the developers added more depth to the battles, since they're rather shallow. All the Metroid does is chase you while you just shoot and run, and there's over 40 of these battles. On a better note, the general platforming is still solid. A version on the Game Boy Color was planned to be developed but was later cancelled. According to David Osen, an NOA employee, R&D 1 included a special Metroid palette in the GBC hardware, which would have made Metroid 2 look incredible. Since a GBC version was never released, a programmer who goes by the name Dr. M64 developed Project AM2R, which stood for Another Metroid 2 Remake. The brilliance of this fan-made game speaks for itself.
As great and innovative as the 2 Metroid games we've discussed are, they were still being outshined by Shigeru Miyamoto's All-Stars, Mario and Zelda.
The R&D 1 team realized this fact back in 1986, after the release of the first Metroid. Hence, Sakamoto diligently started plans for a true sequel, aimed directly for the SNES. Sakamoto, Gunpei, Kano, and also the best of the R&D 1 team started development for this new Metroid game. However, the team had trouble convincing the higher-ups in Nintendo to give them permission to begin such a project, since Metroid only did well in the West, but not in Japan. As a result, Sakamoto and his team had to work on the project secretly for years, until they finally received formal permission. It wasn't easy though. Sakamoto's team had their budget cut constantly. But finally, Super Metroid was released in March of 1994 for the SNES. The story continues directly from Metroid 2: Return of Samus. To recap, after Samus destroyed the Queen Metroid on SR-388, a baby Metroid followed Samus back to her ship thinking that she was the mother. Samus decided to spare the little guy and brought it back with her. I guess S-tier bounty hunters have a soft spot too. At the start of Super Metroid, Samus is alerted from a distress signal coming from the lab where the baby Metroid was taken. There, she is confronted by Ridley, who manages to snatch the Metroid and take off. Realizing that the space pirates are attempting to duplicate the Metroids once again, she follows Ridley to planet Zebes. The game embodied the first 2 Metroid games. Given the hardware restrictions of the NES, areas in the first Metroid looked too similar. However, in Super Metroid, you can notice the diversity and details in each area.
As good as these additions were, they almost caused the game to be cancelled several times during production, because it was taking up too much space on the cartridges.
The devs also built upon the features in Metroid 2 and included a total of 8 directions Samus could aim. There were additions of power-ups, a map system, and new game mechanics that enhanced gameplay. Another notable aspect about the game was the atmospheric music, which was composed by Kenji Yamamoto. In the Metroid fandom, Super Metroid is also largely responsible for propelling the speedrunning community due to the non-linear nature of the game. Speedrunners competed to find the best routes.
Super Metroid is presently regarded by many to be one of the greatest games of all time, but shockingly it performed poorly in sales upon release. The culprit being bad timing and bad luck.
Not only was it facing immense competition from the recent release of Donkey Kong Country, but the console generation of the SNES was also coming to an end. Announcements from Sega, PlayStation, and even Nintendo themselves about their next-gen consoles deterred many consumers' attention away from our poor bounty hunter. Sales in Japan were terrible, but because of strong marketing from Nintendo of America, Super Metroid sold well in the West. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to save the Metroid series from being shelved. Things went completely downhill for R&D1 and Intelligent Systems shortly after. With how badly the Virtual Boy performed, Gunpei Yokoi left the company and tragically died in a car accident in 1997. With Gunpei gone, this was bad news for the team, since he was the one making negotiations for Metroid's internal financial funding. For the next 6 years, Nintendo 64 was at large, and fans wanted to see a new Metroid after a long drought. Shigeru Miyamoto stated that there were plans for a Metroid game on the N64, but was swiftly cancelled. Pokémon was taking the world by storm at the time, hence Metroid was low priority for Nintendo. The only place players could get a taste of 3D Metroid was controlling Samus in Smash Bros. But as the N64 reached the end of its life cycle, there appeared to be hope for our heroine.
Join me in part 2 of our Metroid retrospective as we uncover the events that led up to Samus taking her first step in a full 3D environment. I'll leave a link in the description and I'll see you there.